Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. You may notice that we're in a different location. That's because I'm filming this from home, and the camera quality and sound quality may be different than you're used to from our videos, and that's because we're filming this on Emily's iPhone. We're trying to get this done this week from home so that we can all be here together with Grayson. So he's asleep in the other room right now, so I'm going to try and get through our message this morning pretty quickly, and then we'll let you get back to your day. So today we're going to talk about isolation and loneliness. These are things which many of us are probably dealing with right now. Isolation because we're all under quarantine, and loneliness because, well, we're all under quarantine. We're all stuck at home. Many of us are alone, or we're with just our family. For those of us who are extroverts, that's okay, but man, I need people. I love to be around others and to share life with every one of you. And so it's hard for me to not be able to see you every week and hear about what's going on and talk about different things. One thing that's really hard in this season is that we haven't really gotten to share our beautiful baby boy with anybody. We've had some family members stop in, but it's not like it would be with all of you. Sharing him, and I've been trying to post on Facebook to keep people updated, but it's not the same. And we have started to feel some of the effects of isolation. We've started to feel loneliness because of it. And it's not that we don't like the people that we're with, or we need more from them. It's just that we're made to be in community. Humans are made for more relationships than just one. We're made as a system. You know, we're supposed to be a body connected together and stronger together because of it. And so this morning, as we look at isolation and loneliness, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about the definition for isolation, or isolate, and the definition for loneliness. So I'm gonna pull these directly from dictionary.com. The word isolate means to cause a person or a place to be or remain alone or apart from others. Again, isolate is to cause a person or place to be or remain alone or apart from others. And the second word we're going to talk about is loneliness, which has one definition that says sadness because one has no friends or company, or two, of a place, the quality of being unfrequented and remote, isolation. So these two words are words that we don't like to use. They're words that are hard for us to deal with as social creatures. We want to be with others, and so we don't want to be isolated. And the feeling of loneliness is a feeling that we're sad because we don't have any friends or company. We don't have anyone around to spend time with. Or it's a quality that's we're not being visited frequently, or we feel like we're remote and we're out in the wilderness. And so today we are going to look at a story from the book of Kings that talks about loneliness and isolation. We're going to look at the story that happens right after a story that we talked about a little while ago with Baal and Elijah in 1 Kings 18. We're going to look at chapter 19 today, 1 Kings 19, 1 through 18. I'm going to read the scripture and we'll just talk about it briefly. So 1 Kings 19, verses 1 through 18. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take my life away, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake, baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke it in pieces, the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in a cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So why are we looking at this story when we talk about loneliness and isolation? If you guys remember when we talked about Elijah the last time, we talked about his experience with the power of God. The power of God to overcome the obstacles placed in his path. The one that we talked about then was the wet wood of the altar that Elijah had set up in order to pray and bring fire down to prove who was God. And God overcame that, and from that, the people of Israel were kind of caught up in a bit of fervor for the Lord, and Elijah commanded them to take up the sword and kill all the prophets of Baal, and they did that. But immediately after that comes this. He is threatened by Jezebel that she would do to him what he had done to the prophets of Baal, that she would kill him, that she would make his life like their lives, non-existent anymore, that they would die. And so Elijah is afraid and he flees. He runs off into the desert and he lays down under a broom tree and he goes to sleep. After he has prayed, Lord, just take my life away. It's enough. I'm done. I have failed like all of my fathers before me. I'm just a sinful man, and there's no reason for you to listen to me. And so he lays down and he just goes to sleep hoping to die. And he is awoken by an angel. The angel says, arise and eat. And so he gets up and he sees this cake and there's some water, and so he eats and he drinks and he goes back to bed. He takes another nap. And again, the angel wakes him up and says, arise and eat, for the journey is too long for you. And I think some of us feel like that's the case right now, that we feel like this journey of isolation, this quarantine, is too long for us. Like we don't have the energy, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, or physically, to stay cooped up at home any longer. We want to get out. We want to see people. We want to get back to life as normal. We want things to be the way they were. And Elijah was out of energy, and he needed strength for the journey, and so God gave him that in the form of these cakes. And he goes 40 days and 40 nights off of this meal that he's been given by God. These 2 cakes and this water. It should not have taken him 40 days to get from where he was to the mountain of God, Mount Horeb. But this time of wandering is kind of symbolic in his life. He felt like a failure on the end of this, that he was hoping that everyone would then believe in God because the prophets of Baal failed and Yahweh showed up in the fire. And that was not the case. The people were still not believing. He still didn't feel like he had anybody on his side, and he was still under this death warrant from Jezebel, this wicked queen. And so he is kind of at the end of his wits. And I'm sure some of us feel that way right now. We feel like we're at the end of our wits. Like we can't take it anymore. We need people. We need to be together. We need to be able to go and worship. We need to be able to do the things that we used to do. We need to be released from fear. And I think that's what Elijah was struggling with, was fear, on top of this loneliness and this isolation. And I think those things are kind of tied together. Loneliness, isolation, and fear. I think that loneliness and isolation are so powerful and dangerous to us because it feeds on the fear that nobody wants us around. It feeds on the fear that we're not important and that our relationships are going to fizzle or fade away if we're not actively engaged in them. And so Elijah takes this rest, and then he goes on further. He finally makes it to Mount Horeb, and he has this experience with God where God says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah complains, and he gives him this huge spiel, and he says, "I'm the only one that's left that loves you, and they're trying to kill me. It's not fair." And God says, "Hold on just a minute, I'll be right there." And there's this wind, and this earthquake, and this fire, and then finally there's this sound of a small whisper, a quiet, still small voice, as we've heard it described in other translations. It comes. And when Elijah hears that still small voice, after all this other stuff, which had typically been signs of God's presence in the Old Testament, the wind, the earthquakes, and the fire had all been previous examples and signs of God's presence. And yet in this situation, it is a still small voice. It is the sound of a whisper that draws Elijah out into the presence of the Lord. And again, the Lord asks Elijah, "Why are you here?" And again, he complains, and he gives him this whole huge list. Now, if I had access to God, I don't know if I would complain about the same things that he did. Probably not, because I know I'm not the only one that loves the Lord. My complaints to the Lord, I don't even know what they would be. But they would not be the same. But I feel like if the Lord asked me the same question twice, I would get a sense that he's looking for a different answer. But maybe not, because I'm stubborn and I don't pay attention as well as I should. And sometimes in the midst of my emotions, in the midst of my loneliness, in the midst of my frustration, in the midst of my fear, I probably wouldn't be able to hear what I needed to from the Lord. And so God shows up for Elijah in a very powerful way. And he gives him this revelation that is born out of this isolation, this loneliness. He gives him this revelation that his ministry is not over. Because I think that's what Elijah is dealing with. He's dealing with the idea that his ministry is over, that his life is forfeit, that everything he's worked for has been for nothing. And God is giving him this vision of a future where he is still useful. He says, Elijah, I need you to go to Damascus, and I need you to anoint this guy as king over Syria, and this other guy as king over Israel, and I need you to find this guy named Elisha, because he's going to continue your ministry. He's going to be the one that's the prophet after you. And so he gives him that encouragement, and he says, listen, there's still 7,000 people in Israel who believe in me, who haven't bent the knee to Baal or kissed the golden calf or whatever. And so it's all okay. And he deals with that fear that his ministry wasn't good enough, that his ministry wasn't going to have purpose, or that his ministry was all for nothing. Some of you might be looking at the economy right now and thinking, everything I have worked for has kind of faded away in the midst of this economic downturn. Some of you might be struggling to keep your businesses afloat. Some of you might be struggling with your relationships at home. Having to be around people can be hard, because people are sharp. We have pointy edges. We have broken pieces that the closer you get to someone, the more time you spend with them, the more likely you are to get cut or hurt or wounded from those things. But we're made for a relationship. We're made to be connected to these other people, even if it's painful sometimes. Some of you guys are probably dealing with some really hard things that I don't even know about. But I want to encourage you this morning that if you're dealing with this isolation and this loneliness, that it might just be a precursor to God's revelation in your life. Because that was the situation for Elijah. He was afraid of death. He was afraid of his ministry being a failure. And so he runs off and he says, Lord, just let me die. And the Lord doesn't buy into that. He feeds him. He lets him rest. Feeds him again. He says, here's your strength for the journey. Let's go. And then he finally gets this chance to confront God face to face. And it's not in this big, powerful thing. It's not in lightning or in a huge storm. It's not in an earthquake or a fire. It's not in any catastrophic event. But it's in the sound of a small whisper that the Lord comes and speaks with Elijah. I think a lot of times in our lives we're looking for big signs from God. I think a lot of times we want those big signs as proof that God is present with us. But oftentimes, if we listen for the small whisper, we'll hear God's voice. And I think in this time period, in this time of quarantine, in this time of isolation and loneliness, we have an opportunity to connect and engage with God in a way that we haven't before. Instead of binge watching The Office or working your way through season 1 of Picard like Emily and I have been doing, what if we took some more time to engage with the Lord? What if we took some time to journal? What if we took some time to rest in his presence, as Elijah did under the broom tree? What if we took some time to ask some questions of God, or to bring our grievances to him, and then to be willing to listen to his answer? I think that the Lord has something for each one of us in this time period. I think he's wanting us to pay attention to him and not to our problems and not to our fears, not to our frustrations. I think that God wants us in this time of isolation and loneliness to look for his revelation, to look for what he wants us to see in this time, to see stories of people who are helping each other, to recognize that there are a lot of people that have recovered from this virus. Yes, there are many people that have lost their lives, but there are many more that have made it through, that have been healed of this thing. And so I want to ask these two questions and then I'll let you get on with your day. First question I have for us today is, what is God trying to say to me in this time of isolation and loneliness? And the second question, how have I noticed Him providing me with little taps on the shoulder or a meal in the desert in this time? Basically, how is God sustaining you through all of this? Because I believe that He is sustaining us through this, just as I believe He sustains us every day. I don't think that a little loneliness or isolation is going to hinder God from taking care of His people, because He loves us, and He hasn't let anything stop Him from loving us, not even our own sin. He overcame that. And so I want us to wonder, I want us to look and see, like I said, how God is speaking to us in this time of isolation, and how we might have noticed Him taking care of us and providing for us in these times. If you have something that comes to mind, you can share it, comment below in the video, or send us a message on Facebook. So, hope you have a wonderful day. Lord bless you.